Hi, I'm Mahila Wilson. This is Straight Answers and Gospel channel. We are in this series called Christian Worldview, and we learned about all different attributes of God. And in this part of the series that we are talking about three major things. One is divine simplicity, the laws of logic, and anthropomorphism. So why we are talking about that is because these understanding of these concepts will give us little bit more perspective when we are learning about God's attribute. And those are the three things that we are learning now. So in the last video I spoke about divine simplicity. In that we spoke about how God is not distinct from his attributes and how God's attributes are not distinct from each other. Those are the two things that we learned. In this video we will talk about the laws of logic. So when we are talking about the laws of logic, what we are talking about is the fundamental law that is actually rooted in all our communication. Any kind of sensible communication or our reality is basically rooted in these three laws of logic. So what are those laws of logic? Number one, the law of identity. That means when we are saying something, when we are saying this is A, then that means it is A. That is what is the law of identity. So when we say God, then we mean God. When we are learning about attributes of God, then we are talking about God in all his attributes that is not distinct from each other. And also a being with intellect, will, and emotion. That is who we are talking about when we are talking about God. So that is number one thing. That is the law of identity. And the second law is called the law of non-contradiction. So when we say about law of non-contradiction, then A cannot be A and not A as well at the same time. So when we are talking about God, then God cannot be God and not God at the same time. So when we say God is love, God is holy, then he has to be always love. He has to be always holy in the same sense. So God cannot be God and not God at the same time. So when we say God even came as a human being, incarnate Christ, that he still, when he was in this world, was holy, was actually love, all those things. So it cannot be God, cannot be God and not God at the same time. So that is because even when God was an incarnate Christ, he was still God. So that is what we need to understand. When we talk about A, then A cannot be A and not A at the same time, and with the same perspective. And the last one is the law of excluded middle. So that means in a factual statement, when I'm making a factual statement, that either that statement is true or false, and there is no middle ground there. It cannot be half true and half false. It has to be, if it is a factual statement, either it has to be true or it has to be false. So when I say Christ is the savior of the world, that means it should either be true or it is either false. That is why it is an exclusive religion. Christianity is an exclusive religion because we are making a factual claim like that. And also it is like when we are talking about God's existence, when we say God is, that means whether God is, then if it is not, then God is not. Then there cannot be middle ground. Maybe there is a possibility of person not coming to a conclusion of which one is true yet. That is a possibility, but then it cannot be in a logical sense true and false at the same time, or a middle place. There couldn't be any middle place when we are making a factual statement. In other sense, when I say it is raining, that means it is raining is or it is not raining. It cannot be it is half raining. That cannot be true. So those are the only that is what is the loss of excluded middle. So those are the three major laws: the laws of identity, the laws of non-contradiction, and the laws of the excluded middle. So when we talk about laws of logic, then we are not talking it as though these laws are created by God, like physical law or natural law, like gravity, for example. So physical laws or natural laws are created by God, and God can defy it anytime he wants. He can defy gravity. Many of the spiritual beings can defy gravity, but then we cannot defy laws of logic and still have a sensible communication about God, because it is not the law that is created by God. Instead, it is actually rooted in who God is actually. So that is how we understand the laws of logic. It explains all the reality because it is rooted in the nature of God. So even God cannot defy these laws of logic, because that from God, and who He is, these laws of logic emerges, and that is how we understand reality. So when we have to have any kind of communication about God, or when we have to talk about God and His attributes, and when we are learning about God and His attributes, then we have to always assume these laws of logic exist, and they are and we have to assume that position. Otherwise we cannot talk anything sensible about God. Even anything sensible about any of our reality cannot be communicated without assuming the laws of logic, and that is very, very important to understand. Now, another clarification I want to make here is the laws of logic is not, when we talk about logic in a colloquial sense, that is not what we are talking about. When I say logically, this is how I feel it, then what I'm saying is, from my point of view, this seems sensible. And that is not what is the laws of logic we are talking about here. It is not a sensible humanly perspective, but this is the law that governs the entire reality. So that is what is the laws of logic that we are talking about. So we should not be confused about what we use logic in a regular sense and what is the laws of logic that governs the entire reality. Those are two different things. God seldom act in a very logical way. From a human point of view, God always acts mysteriously. There are so many things that we can't understand. When God does things, we cannot understand why He's doing that. But then in a real logical sense, as far as we are assuming the laws of logic, like God is God, God cannot be God and not God at the same time. Whether there is God, if not, then no God. So last week we spoke about divine simplicity, in that we learned God's attributes are not distinct from God. God's attributes are not distinct from each other. And today we learned about 3 laws of logic. One, the law of identity, means God is God, or B is B. And the law of non-contradiction means God cannot be God and not God at the same time. And the law of excluded middle means when you are making a factual claim, that means it is true or false. There cannot be a middle ground. Whether there is God, if not, there is no God. And there cannot be a middle ground in that. Maybe it will take time for us to determine which side we have to fall. But then the truth is, whether it is true or false, there cannot be a middle ground there. So those are the laws of logic. I hope it helps you. Now leave a comment in our section. Like, again, I wanted to say I am not a philosophical major, so if you find any error, feel free to mention that in our comment section also. Or if you wanted to talk about anything about the laws of logic, continue to communicate with us. We wanted to keep it as a two-way communication. We want to hear from you. Please leave your comments in our comment section. And if you like this video, like, share, and comment. If you like all our video, please subscribe to our channel. May God bless you, and we will come up with another video explaining anthropomorphism, and that is very, very interesting, mainly for Christians who are from Eastern world. So come back for another episode. May God bless you.